You're in the mode of survival, or survival mode.
In essence, what they're saying is, I have or I'm earning so much money, but the costs are increasing, not commensurate to my earning.
Hii ni ile inaitwa try and error method. Ile tu kujaribu tu usikae bure.
We are very weak hegemonies, and that has to change.
This is It's Official with Janet Mbugua. I'm your host. Thank you so much for being here. I recently read a statistic that genuinely threw me off. Infotrak said that 73% of Kenyans are finding it hard to get by. I know we've had statistics and data around the cost of living before. That number was particularly high, and so I really wanted to unpack it. So we didn't only speak to Angela Ambitho, the founder and CEO of Infotrak. We also spent some time in Kibra talking to Kenyans just about how they're getting by. A lot of the issues that came up were trying to readjust their budgets, whether it's taking new jobs, whether it means not being able to access basic needs like sanitary pads, and even having to make sacrifices around educating their children. So I would call her roving reporter, Dorcas, was able to take to the streets and talk to people about what they're going through. And then we had a conversation with Angela.
High cost of living inafanya hadi msee wa rent anaongeza rent. Chakula bado huwezi kula 3 meals a day. Lazima tu tutavumilia kuanzia asubuhi mpaka jioni ndo at least unaweza pata kwa kidogo ya kukula.
Kitambo tulikuwa na maisha mzuri, hata ulikuwa na shilingi 100 unanunua kitu hata mnashiba kwa nyumba. Na saa hii msichana wangu mimi imenilemea.
Kuenda out na familia ilikuwa kitu kama twice a month. Sasa hata hiyo once a month uone man.
Wananchi wa chini tunaumia zaidi. Saa hii sasa ni kujaribu kutry. Hii ni ile inaitwa try and error method. Ile tu kujaribu tu usikae bure.
If you are a young family, you must be struggling, either with a mortgage, car loan, bus fare, and we are not exemption.
You're in the mode of survival, or survival mode.
Thank you for joining us, Angela.
Thank you, Janet.
Maybe you can just tell us, we know you, Angela, I know you, but you're just your name, what you do, just to set the context for the conversation we'll have.
Well, my name is Angela Ambitho. I work in market and social research, but I think most people know me as a pollster, an area that we deal with in research. It's very niche, but in essence what I am is a market and social researcher. So we do research on a broad spectrum of issues, both from the consumer side, media, public affairs, and then of course we, delve mostly as a hobby into opinion polling.
As a hobby?
As a hobby, because it doesn't pay, unlike what most people think. There are other areas in terms of research that actually sustain this place that you're in, and different other teams that work on other critical areas as well that sustain our business.
All right.
So that's me. From what people know, I'm a mother, and of course, just a very passionate Kenyan in general, passionate about my country, and where I feel that Kenya can be in the global arena and also in the spectrum of sub-Saharan Africa.
Yeah, I mean, you talk about being a passionate Kenyan, and I was just saying, I don't know whether now you feel like people maybe I'm finding it hard to lean into that because of the poll that I saw Infotrak do. And it caught my attention, and I was taken aback. It's one thing to know that polls come out, and sometimes you can kind of predict the numbers or say, okay, that makes sense. And then I saw the one that read, majority of Kenyans, in brackets 73%, are either in a severe financial distress or struggling to make ends meet.
Right.
And I just remember the number jumping at me, and I thought that's a really high percentage of Kenyans.
Yes.
And so I wanted to unpack that with you. First of all, did it surprise you? And then what does that mean? When you say 73%, roughly what number are we looking at, and kind of insights into that distress that people are feeling?
Well, so just to give you a genesis, we've always done this poll where we ask about the direction the country is taking. And we've, in the past 3-4 years, actually since COVID, majority of Kenyans have felt that the country is going in the wrong direction. Now, sometimes you get different reasons for, why Kenyans feel that way. People will talk about, the high cost of living, poor governance, and so on and so forth. But the consistent reason over the past year or so has been the high cost of living. And we were sitting here with the team one day, and I said, well, wouldn't it be good to actually unpack what it is that Kenyans mean when they talk about high cost of living? What is it that is afflicting them? And what we found out is when we asked the question, when we talk about cost of living, are you able to meet your daily expenses or your monthly obligations? And majority of Kenyans actually said we are finding it very difficult to cope. In essence, what they're saying is, I have or I'm earning so much money, but the costs are increasing, not commensurate to my earning. So my earning has remained the same, if not reduced, because opportunities have become less. If you don't want to be retrenched, depending on your sector, you will actually take some sort of cut, but stay employed. And for many people, you have found that indeed people have also been retrenched, so they're actually taking up gigs to survive. The reason why the costs are higher is obviously because production costs have become higher. And that is linked to things like cost of fuel, etc., etc. When we talked to Kenyans, they talk about even basic things like just getting from your home to work has gone up in terms of cost of transportation. So your wallet only has so much that you're putting into it, but what you're taking out of it for the same, elements in terms of your costs, whether it be your rent and your housing, your food, your clothing, your school fees was a big issue that was mentioned, is significantly higher.
Yeah.
So you're left in many cases with a deficit.
That's the distress.
So this is the distress that is being caused. And the fact that you then have to think as well of how to mitigate in terms of, do you get something else to supplement your core income? So a lot of Kenyans also told us that, yes, they've had to do other things. Whether you're going to take up a side hustle over and above your job, or you're going to start, perhaps looking at things in your house that you perhaps don't need as much or don't use as much, and therefore start selling them off, are things that, people have generally had to be a lot more creative to make ends meet.
Have you seen anything like it before in terms of, because I know as I mentioned, it stood out to me because I hadn't quite. Were you surprised, or you're like, well, it kind of adds up because of the state of the economy?
Right.
Yeah.
Well, yes, it does add up. I must say the COVID time, Kenyans felt that things were difficult, but there was just a slight buffer in the sense that we didn't have to, during the period when we were in lockdown, we didn't have to go out into the real world as much, if at all. It was manageable somewhat for the middle class, but of course for the lower income earners and the bottom of the pyramid, the issues were real. And of course we can't be ignorant of that. We know that it was difficult for them at that point during COVID. And the issue, Janet, is that COVID was from 2019 on up till 2021, almost. And then we got into an election year. And the thing that the election year does is there is circulation of money because of campaigns. And so people get that buffer, they get a cushioning, and then you're right back after that short campaign period to a period whereby instead of getting this relief, things just slumped and costs started escalating. And indeed, because there's an election year, what happens? You have investors, you have companies, normally, especially in Kenya, pulling back and saying, let's wait and see. Let's wait for things to settle.
Yeah.
After elections, we'll see whether we will pump in more investment or we'll continue in the same trajectory that we had before. This was not the case because of the economic situation that we found ourselves in after the elections. And so these guys, the middle and the bottom of the pyramid folk, which make up majority of Kenyans, over 60% of Kenyans, found themselves in a situation where it is shock upon shock.
That's what it is, though. It just
Yes.
feels like one thing after another. To your point, 2020 COVID into 2021, an election year.
Right.
And then now you're almost recovering from the effects of both and the investors pulling out.
Yeah.
So you've said it well. And then also, usually we have bandwidth for shock, I think.
Yes, yeah.
But this time,
Yeah.
when it's affecting your day to day,
Yeah.
I think it kind of turns into something else. It becomes now stress, even depression.
Exactly.
What
and,
kind- yeah.
and you saw that in the study, because we then asked, how then are you coping psychosocially with all these issues that you mentioned? And a majority of Kenyans as well mentioned in that same study that they are experiencing immense stress. Now, I'm not sure that government, because government is the institution that needs to really realize where our mental state is in terms of whether we can be a productive or not nation. I'm not sure they realize just how stressed the Kenyan populace is real. And it needs to be treated that way. It's not the kind of thing you can wish away. You can't say ni stress too. Now we know that it has become so exacerbated that it is, something that needs to be dealt with from a medical perspective. And government needs to understand that there are triggers. One of those triggers is that you have financial stress that then leads to your mental and emotional stress. If you, as a mother or a father, cannot ensure that your children have food, they have shelter, they can go to school, they're not being chased out of school, how do you stand up with dignity? You can't.
Did you talk to anybody about the kind of huge lifestyle changes they had to make? People who maybe were previously cushioned on
Yes.
the way you were saying salary or
Yes.
something else,
Yeah.
and maybe speaking to their new reality and how they're, because to your point, people had to adjust.
Well, naturally, and a good question, almost a rhetorical one, because yes, most people actually did say that they have had to pull back on their spending. They've had to tighten their belts. There are things that they used to do before that they don't do anymore. So what are people doing? They're tightening their belts in terms of their household budgets, reducing on the quantities of things that they buy on a monthly or weekly basis, periodic basis. We from focus groups, we have heard, parents talking about, reviewing the schooling of their children because they cannot afford the school fees that they used to pay before. And you can imagine the strain that has on children. And whatever impact it will have is something that one needs to study in future. That you were in a certain school and you now have to move to another school and you are perhaps quite happy where you were.
Yeah.
But over and above that is that you also have to review where you live. If you can't pay your mortgage, or indeed you can't bear the burden of the rent that you used to pay before. We had respondents telling us that they have seen neighbors in their neighborhood come in, stay in the neighborhood for a couple of months and leave. And the turnover in terms of neighbors that they've had is a lot higher than they've had in the past. And in many cases, when you ask, what is happening, it is an issue of affordability of that rent. They can't pay the rent.
They get to a certain point where the cycle catches up with them.
Yes.
Everybody's just having this sense of uncertainty about where we're going, how we're moving. How do you think things like this can turn around? What needs to happen for that to turn around?
I think, Janet, the first thing is a reflection and a review from leadership and public policy makers on the narrative that they give the populace, that is you and I. If the narrative from leadership is doomsdale, it is, blame game, then
Gaslighting.
is gaslighting. What happens to us as a populace is exactly what you're saying. You're thinking, do we have the wherewithal from our leadership to solve problems? Because you have, in your various capacities, and even now running your own affairs and your own business, you have your team that you work with. If you went to work every morning whining, complaining that your business was not doing well, your staff, I can guarantee you, would not be comfortable, and they would be very much thinking of where next to go. Now, the unfortunate thing for majority of Kenyans is that they don't have that luxury. They don't have that wherewithal to say, where am I going to go? But those who do, if you talk to Kenyans, are telling you, mimi nimechomoka. I'm going out. This is impossible for me to deal with. But that is because of the narrative, such that leadership, I think, should be sensitive enough that there are things that they must not belabor on telling the populace, even if they feel sometimes it is, in their perspective, the truth. That if you can't give us the positivity that you were selling us when seeking our votes, then you're putting us in a very, very uncomfortable situation. Because when you want my vote, you're not telling me things are very bad and I don't know how I'm going to fix it. And we really don't know, but we're going to try.
You're telling me I
have a solution.
I have a solution.
And this is my solution, and it is going to work.
Especially that part.
Very few people seeking our votes ever tell us, I'm not sure, I'm just going to try. They actually are very, convicted that whatever it is that they're doing will work. So you can't turn around and start whining and gaslighting. And that's really causing pessimism and this psychosocial stress that we're all feeling. And the thing that you're talking about where we're saying, you've just said it, I don't know. I don't know. It's the one time where I really don't know, because you hear that from a lot of people. That this is the one time where I really don't know. Why didn't we feel that way as much during a time when the whole world didn't know? We had a pandemic. We had a catastrophe that the globe dealt with. That should have been the time where we were all feeling, I don't know, really.
But nice when it's coming. Trends-wise, and this might be a big ask, but do you feel that there is something that people can forecast and look out for? What do people need to start keeping in mind in terms of survival mode? What trends do you think people should be concerned about? But also, let's try as we wind up, just kind of give, hopefully, some hope or solution. Trends-wise, what are you thinking or seeing?
The trends right now, we have seen that, of course, we keep talking about the issues in the Ukraine. We talk about, the issues that have been happening in the Middle East and whatnot, and so on. But I think over and above that, I think it behooves on the policy makers and governments in the global south, Kenya included, to ask themselves, how do we become self-sustaining? Such that some of those shocks don't really affect us to the point that we are talking about the cost of wheat, because we get wheat from outside and we are an agricultural producing country. Our GDP depends highly on agriculture, for instance. For us to be a strong country, our government must begin to realize that Kenyan citizen must never be allowed to go without food, because that citizen is as important. If you start understanding that your citizen, whoever that person is, provided they have a Kenyan identity, national identity and belonging, provided they have that you must do everything in your power that as soon as you sign as leadership to ensure that they get their basic needs, healthcare, food, clothing, shelter, and they can stand proud. Then you will have sleepless nights ensuring that your people can compete on a global stage and are as important a person irrespective of the power of our passport, than that person who is living in the US, in wherever. But today, Janet, if I asked you the question, and you're the person who has the expertise in interviewing, do you truly feel that as Janet, a Kenyan, you as a person, as a citizen of this country, are taken to be as important a citizen as that person who is not even Janet, who Kenyans know, with so many followers? Just a regular person in the US or in the UK or in Sweden or in Denmark. And why is that? Our leadership must start asking themselves those questions. Unless we do that, then this thing called hegemony, which is what dictates whether you become a strong nation and respected nation or not, is something that Kenya and other African countries will never have. Because right now, we are very weak hegemonies. And that has to change.
I think that's a really good way to take it back to where it starts from. So thank you. So like Angela said there, people are feeling this a lot more than before, even a lot more than during COVID. She talked about the fact that lockdown meant you're not eating out, you're not spending. And for the first time, different income groups and demographics are all feeling the pinch. And so I think there's a conversation here to be had around re-strategizing and rethinking, planning. It's not the best thing to say because you don't want this to be a situation that you're leaving people feeling like they don't have a way out. Everyone is feeling it. Everyone is trying to lean into the best way to cope. And so all we can do is look within ourselves, look at what we're spending on, look at what we need to reprioritize, and just try our best to push on, have multiple income streams, and really just hope that at some point, the economy and opportunity and policies all kind of align to cushion everyone, but especially those who are left furthest behind. This has been It's Official with Janet Mbugua. I'm your host. Thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again next time. Before you log off, some daunting numbers here. With a population of just about 50 million, according to water.org, 15 million Kenyans lack access to safe water, and 37 million lack access to a safe toilet. So issues like open defecation are really rampant. And again, this is Kenya. Countries like India have a lot worse cases of open defecation, but we are kind of facing a crisis when it comes to sanitation. And we've been able to work with an organization called the Western Kenya Sanitation Project. And what they did is carried out a 5-year program that engages multiple stakeholders in 8 Western Kenya counties to create financially stable, sustainable, transformative, and replicable locally owned sanitation and MHM marketplace programs. And Inua Dada Foundation is one of the organizations for which we're doing it with. And I think for me, it's really about thinking local solutions to local issues, because for a long time, matters around sanitation, around creating even infrastructure to help people, it's not been sustainable. It hasn't been thought through in a way that works for Kenya. And this is what it's changing now. And so hopefully we'll come back here in a year or two, because the project is very new, and talk about the difference it's making. What I can say so far is that advocacy, open conversations around menstrual health, disposal, and sanitation are really scaling in these counties. So something is already working. We just need to close that gap.